Today we have a fascinating sugya, and I don't use that word lightly, as we'll see. Besides negeya, as we'll see, it's also fascinating in the respect that it's something negeya to us, and we'll get a more of an appreciation of the different minhagim, and also somewhat of an insight into the message of this sugya. A number of years ago, someone approached me. It happened to be Erev Tisha B'Av, and he's pointed to his shoes, and he said, "Could I wear these on Tisha B'Av?" And I was astonished because it was beautiful shoes. And what are you asking a question that every child knows? You're not to wear shoes on Tisha B'Av. So then he smiled and he said, these shoes, believe it or not, are 100% non-leather, not a trace of leather in the shoes. It's not like the chocolate that might have a trace of nuts. This is pure non-leather. So here we have, and in recent years, this has become a much more commonly asked question, a comfortable, wearable pair of shoes that are totally non-leather, there's not a trace of leather. Are they mutar lechatchila on Yom Kippur, and by extension regarding Tisha B'Av as well? Another question, if it is mutar, do we have to be concerned about maras ayin? The innocent bystander, the onlooker, sees someone wearing shoes. Does he know that these are non-leather shoes? If typically shoes are leather, it's going to be negeya to Yom Kippur, to Tisha B'Av. And there are other questions that we will clarify, sort of derech agav, and that is the bracha of she'asuli kol tzarki. Can we make that on Yom Kippur or Tisha B'Av? A chayla or ketanim regarding wearing shoes on Yom Kippur. And as with every halacha, we approach halacha with great yira, reishis chachma, yiras Hashem. This is the dvar Hashem. But Yom Kippur has a special sense of urgency. Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur. We don't need more than the fact that some people don't even say the word Yom Kippur, Yom HaKadosh. So the halachas of Yom Kippur are an extension of the Kedushas Yom HaKippur. Yom Kippur, as we know, is an einish kares. Now, even though we paskin in Taf Reish Yud Aleph that regarding the Inuyim, there is no einish kares, but then again, it's part of Yom Kippur. And the great yira and cover that we show Yom Kippur, we have to show to these questions as well. The Mishnah Berurah in Taf Reish Yud Aleph Sif Katan Gimel makes a klal. When you have a suffix, a question about shoes and any of the various type of sveikis, we have to treat it like a sveika deraisa l'chumra. And that's why the Mishnah Berurah in our sim and Taf Reish Yud Aleph Sif Katan Tezvav urges a person who's going even bein hagoyim and he's embarrassed to be seen with non-shoes. In those days, there wasn't the alternative of today. He's embarrassed to walk barefoot in a street that's frequented by goyim. And although it might involve compromising on kvayt habriyos, he's not allowed to wear shoes. Because the general rule of thumb is that when it comes to an issa deraisa, we don't take into account kvayt habriyos. So obviously, the wearing of shoes in Yom Kippur is not a pushover, and we have to take it with the greatest sense of urgency. I should mention, but I'm always amazed by the Minchas Chinuch and Shin Yud Gimel Sif Katan Yud Daled, who says an incredible chiddush. If Chalila someone violates the halacha and wears shoes on Yom Kippur, besides the issa of wearing shoes on Yom Kippur, is also a violation of carrying. Now, he's not carrying the shoes, he's wearing them. But since the Torah says in Yom Kippur, a minal shel or is prohibited, it's not a malbush, it's not a derech malbush, it shouldn't be worn. It's as if he's carrying the shoes because they don't have a din shoes on Yom Kippur. You know, imagine a person decides he doesn't have a yarmulke, he puts a rashba on his head and walks out wearing a rashba, quote unquote. That's not malbush. So the Minchas Chinuch, with his Emunah trained eyes, saw that a leather shoe on Yom Kippur loses its identity as a shoe, and it's tantamount to carrying. Now, other later Achronim questioned this, and the truth is the Minchas Chinuch himself writes at the end of this chiddush, I didn't really work this through thoroughly, but it certainly adds a sense of urgency and importance to our question to know what is mutter. Is there a blanket, heta, to anything that's non-leather. So basically, we should understand that today this shaila has much relevance. There are Crocs, there are non-leather slippers, there are non-leather shoes. And the question is, what exactly is the issa of na'ilת הסנדל that is prohibited on Yom Kippur? Now, I should mention, it's pashut, but people sometimes don't realize this. The issa is not walking with leather shoes. The issa is wearing leather shoes. Even if a person is stationary, he's sitting in shul. If it's leather, there's an issa. In fact, the Ramah discusses if someone is standing on a leather mat, is there an issa? Obviously, he's not walking with the leather mat. So the issa of shoes is lav dafka walking, it's wearing, which of course expands the issa even when a person is not on the street. So the truth is, this is in a certain sense a contemporary issue because today there are many alternatives to leather shoes. As we mentioned, there's non-leather shoes, rubber shoes, there's Crocs, and there are many alternatives. And the question is, what exactly is the issa of na'ilת הסנדל? I would give you an interesting way of looking at it. Either the issa is wearing leather shoes. So if it's leather shoes and I have a non-leather shoe, it's mutter. It's just not the issa. The issa is leather shoes. Maybe the issa is wearing shoes, any type of shoe. In those days, leather was the typical. But maybe today that rubber is a worn shoe. Maybe the issa is wearing any type of shoe, even non-leather origin. Maybe the issa is wearing any foot cover, which would include Crocs. Crocs is not a shoe, but it's a foot cover, it's footwear. Or maybe the issa is, Yom Kippur, you have to go yochev, to go barefoot. That would preclude non-leather shoes and Crocs, and perhaps even a cloth covering on the foot should be also. So Baruch Hashem, we have a reich Torah, a very wealthy, responsive, complete, wholesome Torah, and let us look in our Chazal, and we'll glean enough information to approach the Shaila. The source of the issa of wearing shoes is a Mishnah in Yuma Daf Ayin Gimel, where the Mishnah says Yom Kippur is asa not only in eating, but in the Chamesh Inuyim, which includes na'ilת הסנדל. Now, it's not clear in the Torah what that means, because there is no mention of shoes at all. In fact, it says ta'anu inui. The Gemara understood inui to mean not wearing shoes, but it doesn't say in the Torah it's the shoes, it's a din of inui. And that's why it is certainly plausible that it's not necessarily leather shoes. You have to feel the sense of affliction, of inui, which might include non-leather shoes and even Crocs. But if we could somehow prove that the issa is leather shoes, like shatnez, no one extrapolates that today shatnez includes polyester, because the Torah defines shatnez as wool and linen. So if we could prove the issa is leather shoes, then non-leather shoes and Crocs and slippers are perfectly mutter, and we would have an early dismissal in this early afternoon. So basically, our question is the issa leather shoes, footwear, including slippers, or maybe yochev? So the Gemara in Yuma actually quotes 3 psukim in Tanakh, a pasuk in Shmuel, a pasuk in Yeshaya, and a third pasuk in Yirmiyah regarding na'ilת הסנדל, and all 3 psukim, it's identified as the chiyuv of going yochev. Shmuel, David and Shmuel, the pasuk says he was baicha and he went yochev. Yeshaya and Yirmiyah also manar aglecha miyochev. And that's why it is not hard to understand that any type of footwear might be awesome. In fact, we would even consider maybe wearing socks to be awesome. Yochev is barefoot. If the Gemara defines the Issa as Yachev, you have to go Yachev. That certainly would include non-leather shoes, sneakers, and other slippers. And indeed, when you look at the Gemara, the next Amud, in the end of Daf Ayin Ches, the Gemara has this very shayla. Mahu lotzeis b'sandal shel sham. Rashi says it's a min guma, a soft reed material. In other words, it was a footwear made of a soft reed, natural reed material. Now, this is music to our ears, because this is putting the question very bluntly. This is a shoe, presumably, but it's not a leather shoe. And the Gemara cites no less than 6 Gedolei Amoraim, 6 Ma'aser Rav of Amoraim that wore this type of foot cover, a non-leather shoe of a soft material. But the Gemara has a kasha on this. Correct the Gemara in Hilchos Shabbos, we find regarding a wooden shoe worn by an amputee, and the Gemara says, in Shabbos is one issue, but Yom Kippur, everybody agrees you can't go out with a wooden shoe. V'shavim she'asa lotzeis boi b'Yom Kippur. Do you hear that? It's lav dafka leather. Even wooden shoes is asa. And the Gemara says, a question. Another question. Rabba karach sudre akare v'nafik. Rabba wrapped a material around his foot and went out on Yom Kippur. So obviously, the Issa would have to be a leather shoe. Zok the Gemara la'olam, the kula almi minalhu. In other words, a wooden shoe is asa l'kula alma. But on Shabbos, the issue is a wooden shoe which sometimes falls off, so you might get frustrated, and instead of putting it back on, you'll come to carry it. So Shabbos is a different focus, but Yom Kippur, the Kula Alma, a wooden shoe is Asa on Yom Kippur. Obviously, the Issa on Yom Kippur is not only leather shoe, but more accurately, the Issa is wearing a shoe. And even a wooden shoe would be Asa. But there's another sugya, and that's the sugya, the Mishnah Yavamis, Daf Kuf Aleph, regarding another halacha that is centered around the shoe. And that, of course, is the mitzvah of chalitza. And the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, a cloth shoe is invalid for the performing the mitzvah of chalitza. Why? Because it's not a shoe. It's not a minhag shalar. The Gemara in Yavamis, a little later, that Kuf Beis, Amid Beis, concludes that regarding the mitzvah chalitza, of course you need a shoe. And then the Gemara says, regarding Yom Kippur, that an antiloi shel or, a leather garment that's made into a shoe, is asa. But antiloi shel beged, a cloth foot cover, is mutter. So it's interesting. We have two extremes. Leather in any form is asa, and beged material is mutter. But you know something? I could still suggest that material, soft material that's not leather is mutter, because you do feel the ground when you walk with a soft material on your foot, and there is still the existence of a feeling of inui, because you walk on the outdoor ground with a covering that's of material. It doesn't protect you from the element, from the pebbles, from the other things on the ground. So maybe that's why a beged material is mutter. But perhaps wood, which is a sufficient covering, and you don't feel the ground, and there is no feeling of inui, perhaps even though it's non-leather, even if it's fully wood, it should be asa because there is no inui. So I must tell you, we have a big agenda this early afternoon, but let us look into the Beis Yosef, who Kedarke B'Kodesh did a masterful job in giving us the sugya very clearly. Says the Beis Yosef, according to Rashi, every type of shoe is asa, even a wooden shoe. The sugya in Yavamis, that's only material is excluded from a shoe because you still feel the ground. But according to Rashi, any shoe is problematic. Rabbeinu Yeruchim, one of the great Rishonim, is quoted as saying, I never saw anybody that wears a wooden shoe on Yom Kippur. There's another shita that he quotes, Rabbeinu Zrachia, the Baal Hamor, that says even more demanding. Kol midi de megan min el mikri afapi she'enai me'or. Leather is lav dafka. Wood is lav dafka. Any footwear that you don't feel the ground because it is thick enough to protect you from feeling the ground is a shoe. In other words, Ibn Ezrachi is saying the only heta is when there's a feeling of inui. When you wear a sock or a soft slipper, and when you step on a pebble, you feel it, that is within the parameter of what's mutar Yom Kippur, because then you feel the ground. But according to Ben Ezrachia, if you have a wooden shoe, a plastic shoe, or even a crack, which is not a shoe, but if you don't feel the inui in the ground, that would be the issa that we're concerned about. So here we have some important chumras. Lav dafka or, and could be lav dafka wood. There has to be a feeling of inui. However, the Yerushalmi and the Rosh in Yuma, Perek Ches, Siman Zayin quotes the Yerushalmi that says, no, you got it all wrong. The issa is leather shoe, with an emphasis on the word leather. Not shoe, leather shoe. This is also the opinion of the Ran, that the issa is leather shoe. Anything less than a leather shoe is perfectly mutter. And like the analogy would be, shatnez is wool and linen, and no one will decide today it's wool and polyester, even though polyester is used more than linen, because the Torah said the definition of shatnez is wool and linen. Well, the same Torah says, these Rishonim says the issa is a leather shoe, even though it does not say in the Torah the word shoe, but inui is a leather shoe. The Chinuch and Shin Yud Gimel also quotes his Rebbe that says the issa is leather. The tzuras issa is a leather shoe. Now, this machlokes is mamish the chakir that we began with. There are Gedolei Rishonim based on the Yerushalmi that the issa is leather shoe. Therefore, rubber shoes, Crocs are perfectly mutter. There are other Rishonim that we saw any shoe in any form. And then we saw Ben Ezrachia that says even if it's not a shoe, if you don't feel the sting of the ground, if there's no feeling of inui, then that's awesome. So 3 out of our 4 tzadim to our original Chakira we found in Gedolei Rishonim. And we'll soon see perhaps the 4th opinion that demands Yachiv Mamish, but let's leave that for now. Now, here we see that this question is not as simple as we thought. It's machlokes Gedolei Rishonim. The big question is, but why in the Gemara in Yavamis, where the Gemara asks a wooden shoe? If you hold it's dafka or, says the Bach, and this is important for halacha l'maisa, true is a wooden shoe, but it was covered with a layer of leather, mechupa ba'or. Although it's not entirely leather, or not even primarily leather, but if there's a significant part of the shoe that is leather, that would be awesome. And as we'll see, this has an impact in halacha, because today there are many shoes that are predominantly man-made material, but some parts of it are leather. And that would be this bach, that if there's a leather existence there, it would be awesome. So you have to be careful. We'll get back to that soon. But here we see three different ways of looking at the issa of na'ilת הסנדל on Yom Kippur. How do we paskin? So in Taf Reish Yudalid, the Torah paskins like the Rishonim, that it's only leather that's asa, and he makes the statement, even a wooden shoe that's very protective of one's foot is mutter. The Torah obviously accepted the psak of his illustrious father, the Rosh, that the issa is leather and nothing less. In other words, leather is really the most protection, the most comfort, and on Yom Kippur we deprive ourselves of leather and we fulfill the mitzvah of Inu with a non-leather material. Kol haminim chutz mi bishel or muta. So therefore, everything else, all of our shilas, if it's not leather, is perfectly muta. The Rav and the Mishnah Berurah say an interesting lashon, of course, lashon of the Rav Shulchan Aruch, she'ein shel or ein nikun minol el malbush. You could have a beautiful rubber shoe. It's not a shoe. It's a malbush. It's like a glove on your foot. Here again, I see the emunah that our Chazal had, the Rav and the Mishnah Berurah say a shoe by definition is leather. If you have a comfortable, beautiful, expensive, non-leather shoe, it's not a shoe. It's like a foot cover that's not a shoe. And just to give you an analogy, someone who's hypersensitive and he's allergic to any type of leather. So if he puts on a comfortable shoe that's not leather, he won't have any reaction. Well, the Yom Kippur is we're allergic to leather shoes. Anything less than that is okay. But let me give you a tremendous insight that Rabbi Zalman gives, a beautiful appreciation of the Issa and why it's limited only to leather. Because he writes in Alichai Shloima that someone asked him, but why could you wear shoes? It's so comfortable. True, it's not leather, but it's a shoe. So he says an incredible insight. The Gemara, the Gemara says in Brachas that we make a bracha every morning, She'asa li kol tzarki. And that's a pretty powerful statement. You provided all my needs. What is that going on? Shoe. Why is shoe all my needs? So he quotes the Siddur Hashla that there's a tremendous bracha, a tremendous chshivas in a shoe. Because as we know, there are four parts of the creation. There's the inanimate objects, the daimim, there's plant life, semeach, chai, animal life, and medaber are the human beings. And the way the Bershtam organized the world, that a higher level lives off a lower level. The animals eat plants and humans eat animals. Where do we see the supremacy, the superiority of a human not only when he eats meat, but it's shown most dramatically when a human being wears a leather shoe. Imagine you go over to a cow and say, give me some of your leather, I want to make shoes. What are you doing with the shoes? I'm going to wear them, walk on the ground with them. This shows a tremendous sense of supremacy, that we, as the Bechir of the Bria, of the purpose of creation, we have a total control over the world, and we're allowed to take leather, which is also a living animal, and of course, after shechita, and you skin it, and you can make it to shoes. And this shows, again, most dramatically, that we walk on them. Shoes shows our total control of the rest of the Bria. And he quotes the pasuk in Tehillim, Mo enish kisis kerenu, uven adam kisif kedenu, v'atechasreyu matme eleikim. The person is almost like a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Ukvoit v'hada tatreyu, tamshileyu b'masi yadecha. The Bereshit gave us dominion even over animal kingdom. Chol shata tachas raglecha. This shows in the clearest way the greatness of a human being, and explains that's this halacha we find the pasuk in the beginning of Shmois, Sha'al na'lechem alaglecha ki amokim ata oimed, ashata oimed, admas kodesh. Moshe was told, take off your shoes because you're standing on a very holy place. Now, why can I wear shoes on a heilige place? What's wrong? The Torah to shoes is a display of greatness, the human being's greatness. That's inappropriate in a Makom Kadosh. And then he says, and here's of course, the climax of his old beautiful thesis. So this is why Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, the Issa is limited only to leather. Because leather shows our chshivas. And Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, for different reasons, albeit, Tisha B'Av is Avelis, Yom Kippur is a day of greatness, not our greatness. We have to show a certain sense of submission. We don't wear those leather shoes that highlights our supremacy. Now is a time of anova. And he explained that's why during Avelis, the Oval does not wear leather shoes. Ein shulten b'yem hamavis. So this gives a little more meaning into the shitas that it's only leather, because leather, again, shows our sense of superiority over all of the rest of the world. And be that as it may, the Shulchan Aruch and Tafrei Dalet Beis says emphatically the Issa is to wear a leather shoe, and even wood or anything else is perfectly mutter. Now, however, we can't forget other Rishonim. The Yerach, the Prima Godim remind us that other Rishonim hold that even non-leather shoes, even wooden shoes are rasa. And therefore, we know that there are some people that will not wear even non-leather shoes. And it's interesting, the Rambam in Perek Gimel Halacha Zayin writes that you can't wear a leather shoe, but a material is mutter. You're allowed to wrap a material on your foot. Because when you have a soft material on your foot, you still feel the ground. Says the Beis Yosef, Dvar of Stum, I don't know what he means. Why is he harping on that? You feel the ground. Even wood's mutter. So he said, I don't understand what the Rambam means, but I'm comfortable to paskin like the other Rishonim that any non-leather shoe, albeit a comfortable shoe, is mutter. That's the conclusion of the Beis Yosef as reflected in Shulchan Aruch. However, there's a beautiful tshuva of the Pana Me'irais, Chelik Beis Ibn Chavches, and he was confronted with this question that we grapple with in our times. He writes, Chadashim Ikarav, there's a new type of shoe on the market that's non-leather, and people are wearing it, and Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. In fact, Kehanim are duchening with them. Again, duchening is also part of our sugya, sort of expanding our horizon as far as leather versus non-leather. So he goes through the sugya, and basically his point is the Beis Yosef agrees that he doesn't understand the Rambam. Why is the Rambam stressing that anything, it's mutter, because the Koshia Aretz Magia L'Raglei. So he says very respectfully, the Beis Yosef didn't understand it, but I do understand the Rambam's implication. The Rambam is saying that it's not across the board head to anything that's non-leather's mutter. It's non-leather that you still feel the ground, that's why it's mutter. But if you have a comfortable non-leather shoe, the Rambam would agree that's awesome. Because there's no existence of inu that you're supposed to feel on Yom Kippur. And this, Pana Me'irais, of course, is the basis of those that are machmir not to wear non-leather shoes. Because Shavei Koshia Oretz is not Magia L'Ragles. According to the Rambam, that would be us. Yet after all this, he uses a very mild lashon, a very powerful endorsement of this psak, and he says, therefore, since there are shitas that hold that non-leather shoes are awesome, kol yori v'chara dvar Hashem, yesh le'lahachmir, not to wear any footwear if you don't feel the ground. Now, he's not paskening lahalacha, it's us to wear rubber or wooden shoes. He's saying it's a worthwhile chumrah to only wear when something that you still feel the ground. So here we have another reason for those that are machmir, but those that are mekel are complying with the halacha of Shulchan Aruch, which is based on Gedolei HaRishonim, based on a Rishalmi. Now, the truth is, you'll ask, but the Gemara recorded 6 Amoraim that wore footwear. They weren't machmirim? So the answer is pashut. They wore soft material where the kaishi aretz was magia l'ragleihem. So if that's the case, they were in compliance with even the Panamiris chumrah. But today that we have types of shoes, non-leather shoes, that we don't feel the ground, according to the Panamiris, those type of shoes should be avoided. The Chsam Seifa, that's printed on the page in the HaEysonim Mefarshim, was machmir to only go with socks, nothing else. He says, because the Maisa, you have to feel the kaishi of the Oretz. I should mention, after Chsam Seifa writes this, he says, and that's the Lashon of the Rambam and the Maram Ash. So someone asked me, Maram Ash was a Talmud of the Chsam Seifa, how does he quote his Talmud? I told him, you're making a mistake. The Maram Ash that the Chsam Seifa is referring to is not the Maram Ash, his Talmud, it's Rav Meir Eisenstadt, who was the Panamairis. So he's really referring to the Panamairis. Maram Ash is Rav Meir Eisenstadt, he's Rav Eisenstadt, and he's not referring to the Maram, his Talmud, he's referring to the Panamairis that we just learned, who implies that there is an inyan to wear something of soft material where you still feel the Kaishei Ha'aretz. The Mateh Ephraim and the Mishnah the Aruch HaShulchan all quote that the Tzad L'Hachmir, they don't say it's asa, but they say it's worthwhile trying to wear something of soft material. The Goyin and the Meiser of Achodosh, and both Chazon Ish and Steipler, as quoted in Orchos Rabbeinu, were makbid not to wear any type of shoe, even if it's non-leather. They wore something of soft material where they were able to feel the Kaishi Ha'aretz and able to experience the Inui of Yom Kippur. The Mayad Muzman of Sternbach in the Sefer has another reason to be machmir, and he says the truth is, why are we so convinced that only leather is asa, according to many Rishonim? Because that's a malbush. That's the derech malbush in those days. They had nothing else, basically. I mean, wood was not comfortable, wasn't done. It was done b'shas atchat. But today, and he wrote this many years ago, and today, as we stay on the threshold of Tafshin Pei Aleph, I would venture to say that most shoes are non-leather. It's certainly derech malbush to wear non-leather shoes. So perhaps that would be the original Issa, says Rav Sternbach. It's only leather was primarily the derech malbush, so therefore somehow the Issa is limited to leather. But today, that any type of shoe generally is not leather, or predominantly not leather, perhaps that's included in the original Issa. Okay, according to Shlomo Zalman, that's not true. Shlomo Zalman held that the problem is the leather, but I must be very clear. Mi'ikadadin, the Issa, like the Shulchan Aruch and the Gedolei HaPoskim Ashemepiyim Anuchayim, is the Issa is leather. Anything less than leather is not awesome. And again, the analogy would be to shatnez, and no one decides today there's a different definition of the Issa. It's wool and linen. So true regarding shoes. The Issa is leather and nothing less. The Marsham in Das Torah and in his Chuvas says even the Panamir is only a chumrah, and the minig ha'olam is to wear non-leather shoes, and Shalom al Yisrael. Rav Shlomo Zalman in Alichas Shleim is also mekel, and I guess after his beautiful explanation and the insight of why leather is asa, we could breathe easier that we understand it's only leather. You'll ask, but why not be a sport and be machmir like the Panamairis and wear something where you feel the Kaishi Aretz? So I'll share with you a fascinating Marshag in Chelik Beisim and Kuf Yud, where the Marshag says it's wrong to be machmir on Yom Kippur like the Panamairis. Why? Don't forget, Yom Kippur is a Yom Tiv, but it's not just a Yom Tiv. The Mishnah in the end of Tainis says it's the greatest Yom Tiv. It's the greatest Yom Tiv. Why are you causing yourself unnecessary pain? The Torah says, Inui. Chazal defined that as leather shoes. So you want to wear something that you feel pain? Who asked you to be machmir and violate Simchas Yom Tov? In fact, he goes to an extreme. He says if someone would decide in Yom Kippur he wants to stand on the cold ground and feel pain the whole day, he's a shaitan pesi. He says emphatically, if someone does something on Yom Kippur to cause extra pain, he gets einish because of Bezoyin Yom Tov. Yom Kippur is a Yom Tov with all of Hilchas Yom Tov when shaykh, because we don't eat a Suda. But he says we have Ksus Nikia, and he spells it out. If someone wants to be machmir and wears something that he feels when he walks to shul, it's an ordeal, it's painful, he's violating the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. So not only he doesn't endorse the Panameirais as a chumrah, but he feels it's a chumrah asli de'issa. So I hope, precious listeners, you hear this sugya is a beautiful sugya. We have those that are machmir because they hold it's asr. If it's asr, it's asr, not machmir. They would hold that the chiyuv of neilat hasandal is any shoe where you feel the ground. It only is you have to feel the ground. So according to them, they're not being machmir, they're following the issa of neilat hasandal. The Marshag's objection is you want to be machmir. But if you hold like the other Rishonim that the issa is any footwear, then you have to wear something of very thin material where you feel kushi aretz. But for the Shulchan Aruch and Gedolei HaPoskim that endorse the Shulchan Aruch that the only issa is leather shoes, we understand why minig ha'olam is to wear anything ranging from non-leather shoes, rubber shoes, Crocs, slippers, etc. That's not a violation at all of any issa because the issa is leather shoes. I saw a beautiful shot in the Siach Yitzchak, one of the primary Mefarshim on Masechta Yuma. Gemara says about one of the Amoraim that he went out with this kosher shoe, so to speak, a non-leather shoe, on Yom Kippur, and the Gemara wonders, I wonder if he did the same on a tainus, on a regular tainus sibur. So the Siach Yitzchak, if Yom Kippur, which is essentially Karas, Yom Kippur, he was Mekel, so what are you asking tainus? Well, how could tainus be more chamer than Yom Kippur? So he says, what we just said is beautiful, because on Yom Kippur, there's a focus on avoiding extra inui. Maybe that's why he went out with this kosher footwear. Can't be machmir, you have to be careful. But tainus tzibur, there's no din of inui, it's a tainus. There's no din of Yom Tiv, it's the din of inui. You could be machmir and be more mana yourself. He doesn't, of course, quote the Marshag, but it's the same line of reasoning. Yom Kippur, if you're not mechuyet to be machmir, maybe better not to be machmir. What's noteworthy, the Mishnah Berurah only quotes the Panameirais in Hilchas Yom Kippurim. Regarding Tisha B'Av, he omits the chumrah of the Panameirais. It seems to me, why? Because he's being machmir on Yom Kippur because it's a deraisa. Tisha B'Av at most of the Rabbanan. Obviously, he didn't accept the Marshag's premise, and he looked at it from a halachic perspective. If it is a deraisa or safek deraisa, we have to be machmir. And I guess there's no problem of inui, of extra inui, because if it's a sveika deraisa to be avoided, then you're doing what's right. I heard the Shem Rabbaran, he was machma only Yom Kippur and not Tisha B'Av for a different reason. This is Rabbaran's avot. And he said, because the pasuk says inui, so try more inui. Tisha B'Av is a din of avelis, no din of inui, which is again the opposite of the Marshag's understanding. So I think we see clearly that our sugya is very alive and vibrant, and a person should learn the sugya and act according to his understanding of the sugya. But we definitely see the truth, the beauty of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chayim. Those that wear any non-leather shoe is the Mechaber Shita based on Rishonim and Yishalmi. Those that wear non-leather footwear, it's because it's not awesome, and let's not cause unnecessary inui. What's noteworthy, the Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Hay says those that are machmer to wear something that you have to feel the kaishia aretz should not wear kalashin shel gumi. which we conventionally teach as rubbers. In fact, today we also call galoshes, which is very hard to understand because I've seen many choshev people that dafka wore leather, dafka wore galoshes, rubbers on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur because they wanted to feel the ground. And Mr. Burr is answering galoshin and the Ber Moshe and the Tshuva wonders what's wrong with galoshes. That's better. You feel the ground. So the answer, obvious answer is they had a much thicker type of galoshes. We didn't feel the ground at all, and that's what the Mishnah is referring to. But our galoshes would be a wonderful alternative for those that are machmir, because he doesn't feel the ground. Because he still feels the ground, and the Mishnah is referring to one that we don't at all feel the kaishei haaretz. I would be remiss in not mentioning the sheet of the Bach. The Bach, based on a Tosefta, writes that the ikka is to go barefoot literally. My Rebbeim did that, and he says emphatically, less than barefoot is a violation of the Issa. Now, if you hear this the first time, you will be shocked. Where's he coming from? But the truth is, you learn the Gemara faithfully, where the Gemara defines the Issa based on the psukim in Tanakh that we mentioned earlier. No less than 3 times the Gemara mentions the word Yachev, and the Bach took that literally. And the K'tzei Amata in the Ashmatis quotes from the Kuznetzer Magid, one of the Gedolei Chasidis, who says, Daiga, he says, I'm worried about people that wear even slippers. It's a violation of this Bach. But Lamaisa, I haven't seen anybody that's going barefoot, literally even without socks. And I saw the Torah Lishma, that's the Ben Ish Chai's Tshuva Seif and Kuf Samach Zayin, who says it's inappropriate to go barefoot. First of all, it's inappropriate for Kvayd Abrius. Also, you walk on the ground and you don't know what you're going to step on. And Yom Kippur, we have to be in the ultimate Nikios. We walk into a bathroom, you don't know what's doing there. How can you go barefoot? And that's why he says it's not Kedari Machma like the Bach, and the Bach's own son-in-law, the Taz, the end of Sitkot and Aleph, he says, Lamaisa, the Amoraim wore some type of foot covering. We mentioned earlier from the Gemara 6 Amoraim that went with some foot covering. Why weren't they Machma like the Shver of the Bach? Obviously, they rejected that Chumrah. And that's the Shita of the Minika Olam, I should say. But at least we started with a Hakira, 4 different possibilities. They all exist. The halacha is only leather. Some Rishayim hold even a non-leather shoe is asa. Some feel the criterion is you have to feel the ground. And there is even the Bach Shita that Yachev literally means barefoot. Who's right? The one that follows his minig, v'amech kulam tzadikim. Lamaisa, as we said, it's important to make sure that your non-leather shoe or croc, I've seen crocs that have a leather component. It has to be free of any leather. Now, some say if the leather is mamish, not part of the shoe itself, just a design on the top, perhaps that's okay. But I've seen leather playing an integral role in the composition of the shoe or slipper. So you have to be careful, before Yom Kippur. Don't come to the Rav on Yom Kippur with your shaila. Make sure you 100% non-leather material, and then you have what to be saimacham. Just to add a few questions to show how the beauty of the sugya, how responsive our Torah is, someone asked me a thought-provoking question. Can I wear a leather belt on Yom Kippur? So I asked him, what about your watch band that's leather? So of course there's no shaila, because it's not a din in leather per se. It's a din in shoe. Varaya, the Ramah is mekel to stand on a leather mat. There's no issa hana from leather on Yom Kippur. There's an issa of neilas hastanda, which is defined as a leather shoe. The only thing I wonder is, according to Shlomo Zalman's deeper appreciation of the issa leather, don't show your superiority by using leather on Yom Kippur. Maybe a belt or a watch band would be asa, but the answer that even that's not true. Because the pasuk that Shlomo Zalman mentions, kol shata tachas raglecha. It's something you're stepping on, you're wearing a shoe of leather. That shows a superiority. But a leather belt or a leather watch band, of course, is okay. But it's noteworthy that the Pri Megadim and Sivkot and Zayin has a shaila or dog va'oif. skin of a fish or of a bird, mistaver the asa. Lav dafka leather. Now, according to Shlomo Zalman's hezbollah, I could understand that also, because you're taking an animal and you're wearing it, even if it's not leather. So you have an afkamina both ways. Someone asked me, he has gloves that have a leather inside. I'm sorry, the hair of an animal inside, a fur inside. But that's not leather. Again, the is leather. Again, like the Shlomo Zalman, maybe you could wonder about that because it comes from the animal. But basically, it's a din of a leather shoe, not a leather belt, and not a fur type of glove that has the inside of a fur from an animal. I should mention the Shulchan Aruch and Siv Gimel, the next Siv, discusses people that have problems going without shoes, a chayla, or a woman that after childbirth, and they're more sensitive health-wise, so they're allowed to wear leather shoes. The Paiskim say that today, that there are so many alternatives that are non-leather, why wear a leather shoe when you could find something of non-leather that serves the purpose as well as a leather shoe? The same is true regarding young children, where you could have done it's mutter for young children. But again, today we have a viable option that certainly should be pursued. Someone asked me, he has a beautiful non-leather shoe. Does he have to be concerned about marasai? No one knows that he invested big money to get this shoe that looks as good and fancy as a leather shoe. And the emes is, marasai is not a nervous issue, like we say that someone is nervous. We find the Gemara, dam, that's really mutter. Is it also als marasayin, dam dogim, chalev shkeidim, a whole sugya, how to avoid that marasayin. And indeed, if Shlomo Zalman and Mincha Shloimeh Tinyanan and Gimel, he is concerned. If it looks like leather, how does the innocent bystander discern that it's not leather? Doesn't not wearing a sign, non-leather. But the truth is today, I wonder if that would be applicable, because today, as is well known, many, I didn't take a survey, but certainly many shoes are non-leather. And I should mention, Alicha Shloimeh, in a footnote, he is Mekel. I saw Rabbi Yash was also Mekel, because today it's common knowledge now. If the person, the innocent bystander, is not so innocent, and he's looking with an ayin loy toy, and he says, hey, he must be Ayvan and Issa, that's his misjudgment. Let him know that people are careful, and they found a non-leather shoe. So today in Tafshin Pei Aleph, I think it's understood that a person comes to shul with nice-looking shoes, it would be mutter, like the Shulchan Aruch, that it's non-leather. The bracha she'asali kol tzarki, as we mentioned earlier, was mandated to highlight the benefit of a shoe. Based on that understanding, both Arizal and the Goyin would not make the bracha she'asali kol tzarki on Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur, because they weren't benefiting from a shoe. They made it Matzai Yom Kippur, Matzai Tisha B'Av. However, the minig, as Mr. Bura writes in Hilchas Tisha B'Av, that we do make the bracha shasli kol tzarki. We're not wearing shoes. So one hezbollah says the Torah that lamaisa, you're allowed to wear shoes. If you go in a dangerous place where there's scorpions and poisonous snakes, you're allowed to wear shoes. The second hezbollah says the Beis Yosef is because lamaisa, the bracha is not on me. Many of berachas hashach has minhagis shel olam. In fact, some say even someone that didn't sleep makes the brachas in the morning because the Baruch benefited mankind. It's not me, it's the world. And since the world benefits from shoes on a daily basis, although Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av are excluded from that benefit, but it's still a benefit that mankind realizes on a daily basis, and the bracha is appropriate. But one could certainly understand why today there's more reason to make shasli kol tzarki, because today we have many kosher footwear, non-leather, Crocs, fancy non-leather shoes. You'll say memonashach. If you're wearing it on Yom Kippur, that means it's not a shoe. The answer is that's not true. The issa on Yom Kippur is a leather shoe. Maybe shasli kol tzarki is implying any footwear that makes walking comfortable. But the mice, at the end of the day, the minig is we do make the bracha shasli kol tzarki unless you follow the minig of the Rizal or the Vilna Gaon. Another interesting shaila: why not wait till Matzoi Yom Kippur and be machmal like the Gra or the Rizal? The answer is it's not so pashut. You're allowed to do that. because many poskim hold that after chatzos you can't say these brachas, certainly at night. So if your minig is like the Ariya and the Gra, continue minig, but if the minig oilam to make the bracha, then you go with the minig oilam, make the bracha in the morning, and thank Hashem that He's giving you a viable option, a comfortable, acceptable substitute. Another question about touching sneakers or slippers, which you wear on Tisha B'Av Yom Kippur, do you have to wash your hands? Don't forget, you touch shoes, you have to wash your hands. So you say, just be a sport, wash your hands. What do you care? There says Yom Kippur, we don't wash unnecessarily. We have to differentiate between chiyuv and chumrah. If indeed there's no obligation to wash only on a leather shoe, then we could suggest that touching non-leather shoes, there will be no chiyuv netila. I be machmir. Yes, be machmir and don't wash your hands because you're not allowed to wash your hands unnecessarily. So to make a long story short, the poskim do make a differentiation that lamaisa, even though it's non-leather, and some say non-leather shoes has no chiyuv netila, but since the main reason is because you walk on the ground and it's an unclean type of material, so there's not much of a difference between a non-leather and a leather. I know there are those that hold only leather, but I think the minig ha'olam is to be careful and wash even when touching non-leather, but one should not be overzealous. If you touch the top part of the sneaker or the slipper, you're not touching the bottom, touching the ground, one should taka not wash and be machmir war on Yom Kippur and not wash. Is a leather shoe muktzah on Yom Kippur? People come to shul, typically they're wearing their shoes. They get to shul early enough, they change, and they put on their Yom Kippur footwear. The shoe is on the floor. Are you allowed to move it? Is a leather shoe on Yom Kippur that's absolutely asa considered muktzah? So you're wondering, muktzah, it's a shoe. But then again, the analogy might be to what Mechaber discusses about shatnez. Shatnez, according to some shittas, is muktzah because it's just not wearable. It's just not, the Torah does not recognize it as a wearable beged. So we could add like the minchas chinuch that a shoe of leather on Yom Kippur is not even a malbish. You consider carrying, there's a good reason to believe that it's muktzah. But lamaisa, someone, like we said earlier, someone that's walking in a dangerous place, he's allowed to wear shoes. A chayla is allowed to wear shoes. Lamaisa, there are different days in the poskim. We always say, a chacham eina b'roisha. You come to shul erev Yom Kippur, don't just throw off your shoes and then worry about it later. Take off your shoes. First of all, one should never leave shoes lying around. It's not nice for other people. Mr. Brewer already discussed that regarding duchening. It's not covered abriya, so leave your shoes lying around. So put it in a bag, put it away, and you don't have to come on to move it. A most important halacha that I wanted to mention, I guess it gives us an appreciation of this whole sugya, is the message that we have from the Issa of Na'ilת HaSandal. You know, there's a common misconception that equates Yom Kippur with Tisha B'Av. You know, like someone told me in jest, but I think he was making a very important point. Twice a year, I feel funny coming to shul wearing my sneakers, Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, as if they're both the same. But the truth is, anybody who knows anything knows that they are so fundamentally different. They're almost diametrically opposed one to the other. Tisha B'Av is the saddest day of the year. It's the ultimate avelus. It's a churban of 2,000 years. Yom Kippur, the Mishnah tells us, is the greatest Yom Tov that Yidden have. So, but why are we wearing sneakers on both Yom Tovim, or sneakers or slippers, whatever it is? A fundamentally different reasoning. The Torah in Tafrei Zayin quotes Pirkei Eliezer that we try to do things on Yom Kippur to create this comparison to a malach. On Yom Kippur, we stand in shul with shalom, says the Pirkei Eliezer. We forgive one another like malachim, get along. We stand barefoot, we don't eat. Many halachas are based on the analogy of a human being on Yom Kippur who reaches the heights of a malach. We don't wear shoes not because we're an avelus. Chalil is no avelus, it's the greatest Yom Tov. But we're aiming for the greatest heights that a person could attain on Yom Kippur. The Cham Seifen is drashis, and it's worth reading his lashon. The reason why we don't wear shoes is not to torture ourselves and like the marshik, like the marshag, It's beautiful. It's a Yom Tiv. So why don't we wear shoes? Ki im machmas kedusha ukribus udveikis k'malachi hashares. It's like when Moshe, he says even more so. It's like when Moshe went up in the Shemayim 40 days, he lived a non-human existence. Yom Kippur, we all have that experience. It says, Tanu nafshei seichem, inoi, listen to Chasam Sofer. But it's the word inoi means his oiris, like the pasuk in Isaiah, Shemayim yanu esa'aretz. It's a beautiful appreciation of the heights one could attain in Yom Kippur. Gedal Yeshua, the Gedal I remember heard it once from him. He pointed out the Rambam in Perek Aleph Halacha Daled when he codifies the Issa of Yom Kippur. It's a mitzvah lishbois mimachilu shesiya. Lishbois in modern Hebrew is like shvisa, vacation. The Rambam is telling us that Yom Kippur we are privileged to a vacation from Gashmias, a disconnect from Gashmias. And that's highlighted by the fact that we're like angels. We don't eat, we stand, and we don't wear shoes. So it's not Inui, it's the greatest experience of Kedusha. It's Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Maral, in both in the Drushes and in Derech Hashem, highlights this point. The reason why we have a din of Inui is the Salek, to take away from us the feeling of Gashmias. The once a year that we could live like a malach is Yom Kippur. We put on our talis every Yom Kippur and we soar level after level until we come to Na'ilot. And you see that, the difference between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. Tisha B'Av, Mishnah Berurah says, after the Ma'ariv, go home and eat, put on your shoes and come back and say Kiddush Levana. Inappropriate to say Kiddush Levana when you're not wearing shoes. Yom Kippur, the minig is, Matzah Yom Kippur, with our sneakers, before eating, we say Kiddush Levana. We want to hold on to these precious moments of Yom Kippur to live like a malach. Our greatest badge of honor are our non-shoes. That shows that we're still aiming to maintain this level of greatness. But there's more than that. The Gedolim Mekubalim say on Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to wear shoes, but don't stand on the ground. Put something in between. Put a sheet, a paper towel, because Arura Hadama, the earth is cursed, and it's wrong for a human being to stand on the earth directly. And you'll notice many people who don't wear anything on their feet but socks, they put something between the ground and themselves on Tisha B'Av. Yom Kippur, there's no problem. Says Maram Chagiz, because Yom Kippur, it's Admas Kodesh, the world is Kodesh, and the Yid is Kodesh. He is a Kodesh, he is something like a Malach, that he could stand directly on the ground, because it's like the Beis HaMikdash. Sha'al na'alechem al raglechem, you could stand on Admas Kodesh, because you're an Ish Kadosh. The Welt says the fundamental difference between Tisha B'Av and Kippur is Tisha B'Av is so sad, who could eat? Who has patience to eat? Yom Kippur is so holy, who wants to eat? And I would say the same wisdom applies to shoes. Tisha B'Av, who could wear shoes? We're so uncomfortable with the pain of Golus. Yom Kippur, who needs shoes? We have the Kedusha by not wearing shoes. We have this level of Moshe Rabbeinu in Shemayim 40 days without our shoes. And the Inuyim help us make this disconnect, or this connect to Kedusha. Someone told me he was teaching a day camp class during the summer, and he asked the boys, right before Tisha B'Av, boys, what's the saddest day of the year? One boy raised his hand, says, yeah, saddest day is Yom Kippur. And I heard that it was so painful. There's no chinuch. The saddest day of the year is Yom Kippur. That's the happiest day. The saddest day is Tisha B'Av. And this is a tremendous appreciation to enjoy Yom Kippur, to enjoy every moment, to savor the flavor, like they say. Not to look at the clock, when is it over, but to connect to the day. Shlomo Zalman was once asked on a random day, what's the happiest day of the year? And his response was, when I make a shechayanu, when I go into Yom Kippur. And someone that appreciates what the Yom Kippur is understands the depth of that statement. It's a day, like Chatzkel used to say, is a mabul shel rachamim. Bali Musa would dance Matzah Yom Kippur, realizing what they how they changed, how they grew in a Yom Kippur. We're looking forward to Rosh Hashanah, then we prepare for Yom Kippur. Let's not forget the underlying message of the na'ilת הסנדל. It's an appreciation of the greatness of the day. We should all be zeicha to aksiv achsim b'toiva, ashnaz gula, lanu l'Yisrael, amen v'amen.